Okay, our next speaker is Joe Nocera.
I don't have any written notes, so bear with me. So Matt just said that the Second Circuit said that the compensation has to be tethered to education. So let's talk about how Alabama does that. Prior to the passage of the new stipend that gives athletes the full cost of attendance, stipends, by the way, that came about because the Power Five conferences basically threatened to leave the NCAA, which is how they got the power to do that. The full cost of attendance at Alabama was somewhere around $2,500. And Nick Saban woke up one day and said, you know, over at Auburn, it's like $4,000. And we're going to have a recruiting disadvantage. And today at Alabama, it's over $5,000. So the idea that they're not using money to recruit athletes is bullshit. So is the idea that the NCAA says in their statement to us that education is the first priority and athletics come second. Everybody knows that's insane. Everybody knows that's not true. If it was really true, you wouldn't send East Coast teams to Oregon to play in March Madness. You wouldn't have Hawaii leaving their campus from March 1 to March 19th to play sports. You wouldn't have players not allowed to take majors that they're interested in because it interferes with practice. You wouldn't have a system where the so-called 20-hour-a-week limit doesn't include watching film, doesn't include travel, doesn't include an entire weekend spent on a game except for the 3 hours of the game. They shouldn't call them student athletes, which, by the way, is a term of propaganda created in 1956 to avoid workers' compensation. Call them what they are. Call them athlete students, because that at least tells you what the priority is. Or call them employee students, because that's what they really are. Football players and men's basketball players have been brought to the university to generate revenue for the university. That's their job. Everything else is secondary. Some of them get to graduate, some of them get a good education, many of them don't. The fundamental role of an academic counselor is not to get the athlete an education, it's to keep the athlete on the floor or on the field. We need to acknowledge this. There is a fundamental disconnect between a multi-billion-dollar entertainment complex and a university. Universities are ill-equipped to be running these multi-billion-dollar complexes, which is why you have these disparities in education and in the abilities of students, athletes to do things that other students can do, and all the various problems that we're talking about. Now, you know, there's a million things you can write about when you're at the New York Times. And for 5 years, I was on the op-ed page, and I really could write about anything that I wanted to. And I kind of fell into this. And people used to, when I first started writing about it for the Times, I would get occasional emails from angry readers who would say, why are you wasting your time on sports? You know, why don't you write something about something important like politics, like nobody at the New York Times writes about politics, right? And I said, this is not a sports issue. This is a human rights issue and it's a civil rights issue. Because it is overlaid with race, and I hope we get into that a little bit later. And so I came at this originally not through the prism of money or pay, but through the prism of rights. What first got me really angry was learning about a Connecticut freshman named Ryan Boatwright who was not able to play, who was ineligible to play because the NCAA was investigating his mother, who had the nerve, if you can believe this, to accept money single mom raising 4 kids who accepted money so that she could go on recruiting trips to see where her son might play college basketball. This, of course, is a crime. And what made it worse was not just that this investigation going on, but the extent to which she was humiliated, harassed, locked in a hotel room for 5 hours with 4 white guys and not allowed to make a phone call. I mean, come on. This is not right. And as I learned more, I began to understand that college athletes simply don't have the rights of every other student on campus, and for that matter, every other American. They don't have rights of due process when they get in trouble with the NCAA. Neither do coaches, by the way. They're extremely limited in what they can take, what they can do. You know, any other student, if you're a fabulous music student, prized in the music department, and you want to transfer because your favorite teacher went to Stanford, nobody tells you you have to sit out a year. Or you can only go to certain schools, but you can't go to any schools in the Big Ten. You can't go to Stanford because that's where your teacher went, so you're not allowed to do that? Why is that? Why is an athlete restricted like that? Why is that right? So among the rights that athletes are deprived of are economic rights. Every other student on campus has the right to make money. Some maybe make a lot of money because they're a fabulous musician, or they're starting a company out of their back pocket while they're at Stanford, or and some others make money in the cafeteria. They're students, and they make money, and there's no problem. But if we talk about an athlete making money, then of course a terrible thing is about to happen. College sports is about to be destroyed, and we have to protect the athletes from whatever. So let's be honest about what the NCAA is. It's a cartel. It is a cartel. It exists, the amateurism rules fundamentally exist to ensure that the labor force is unpaid, and that Nick Saban can make $7 million, and Mike Krzyzewski can make $10 million, and Jim Harbaugh can make $5 million. And OSU can afford to build a $40 million indoor practice facility for the football players. Now, why do they build these facilities? They build them so that they can press recruits who will come to the school. Wouldn't it be cheaper just to pay some of the money to the recruits instead? So, you know, Vince talked about the salary cap idea I had. Andy helped talk me out of that idea. On the sensible grounds that you need a party that represents the players in order to be able to do that, which is why you have salary caps in the pros, because you have unions. And also, by the way, which is why every time there's a union fight with a major league, the union threatens to decertify, because if they decertify, there goes the salary cap. So I've moved away from the salary cap idea, although I do like the idea that a coach ought to be able to use money to recruit an athlete. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I went to Boston University because they gave me the biggest scholarship. I made a decision based on money. Tons of students go to schools based on money. Who has the lowest fees? How much does a state school cost versus a private school? Who gives the largest? And by the way, I think it would be a more honest system. If you said, I'll sign a 3-year contract, I'll pay you $40,000 a year, you're here till at least you're a junior. It's more honest. I've been advocating for a long time. Part of the problem here is that so much money is sloshing around under the table. Now, all these sleazy agents, all these people getting paid to direct athletes to certain schools. You know, just say, come here and I'll pay you. And, you know, maybe I'll pay you less than the other school, but I'll give you more because I'm a better football place, and you have a better chance to get into the pros. Even beyond that, athletes should have economic rights. and they should be able to find their value, like every other American. And that doesn't mean they should make $1 million or $2 million. There are units, the NCAA, in my view, violates the antitrust laws because they have 100% market power and there's no competition. There's no ability for anybody to offer any competition to the NCAA in terms of the way it compensates. But conferences, for instance, do have competition from other conferences. And so, for instance, the Ivy League actually has a different compensation model than everybody else. Nobody says it's wrong. Nobody says they can't do it. It just happens to be lower than the NCAA's compensation limit because they don't give athletic scholarships. But I don't see any reason why you couldn't have competition for athletes between the Big Ten, the ACC, the Big 12, all the other schools, all the other conferences. Now, one of the implications of paying players is that you'd have a problem with the Middle Tennessees and all the schools that make March Madness so much fun because they win a couple of rounds before the big boys squash them. I think that's okay. As I said before, we have this giant multi-billion-dollar entertainment complex attached to universities. That's never going to change on some level because it's so popular. So many people want it. And because Matt is right. Schools are not irrational when they pour money into football and basketball and other sports because it is a front porch. I mean, at this school, so how many people are in this room? 150, 200 people? 69,000 people, as I understand it, have paid $5 to see the spring game at OSU, which is going to take place shortly. The Final Four, the pregame of the Final Four, it looked like the Super Bowl. It did, with the players' faces on the floor and the lights shining and all the hoopla and the Capitol won this and it is absurd to say that this is not a complete 100% commercial enterprise except in one area, which is the labor force, which is free. I think that's wrong. I think it needs to change. But I also think that the chances for change are extremely slim, partly because of the courts, and partly because there is an entire enormous infrastructure allied on the other side whose economic self-interest hinges on not paying the players. And so they can talk all they want about amateurism and education and all the rest of it and all the other paternalistic reasons they have for not paying players. But the bottom line is the money that should be going to the players is making everybody else rich. I'll stop there.
Okay.